that makes most sense in terms of the context of this group. But Tara is fantastic, and I would suggest that all of you connect with her on LinkedIn, as well as other places. But she is just a wealth of knowledge, experience, and creativity. So I'm excited to have her present today.
Taylor, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen real quick. And please let me know if you guys can see it. Yeah, okay, awesome. And can you guys hear me okay? Okay, awesome.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, hello everyone. I'm honored to be this week's expert for Midday Connect. I am Tara Spalding. I'm the president and founder of Henhouse Ventures, which is an incubator for startups who rapidly desire to scale when entering a massive or emerging market. An important component to market entry and scaling is ensuring that your company has optimized what I call packaging. It's important to make sure the strategy is correct, or else it hinders adoption and worse, profitability. And let me drill into this a bit more and explain this point. If your company wants to succeed, the point in being in business is to make money at the most profitable extent possible that is sustainable over the longest amount of time. When profitability dips, it's time to evaluate what changed. Did the market change? Did the cost of customer acquisition prohibitively increase? Did a competing product enter the market with a more suitable package for your customer? Many of us in Midday Connect have been or are still pivoting because of COVID. Sectors evaporated, customer habits changed, and the appetite for risk, as well as personal expendable income, has plummeted. And that's normal. In 2008, I was a CMO at a large software company in San Francisco when the financial market collapsed. And within 8 days, our executive team and board had to pivot radically to preserve our cash and survive in a new market condition. What happened in March of 2020 required the same diligence from me as before. After experiencing this twice, I'm going to connect the dots for you on how your business strategy, financials, and packaging all tie together, and then show you my technique on how to choose one, stay calm, and carry on. All right, let's roll through this. You must be able to articulate your business model because it is the bones of your company. My incubator is a tech-enabled services company because Henhouse has some pretty bitchin' software and data tools that experts who want to help and service startups. Amazon is a digital retailer. Ford is a manufacturing company, and Slack is a subscription company. Your business model will directly influence your business plan, which is how your company orchestrates operations to achieve sales. That is dependent upon your target market. Who are you selling to? How you classify them? What problem do they have? And how does your problem solve it? And most importantly, how much are they willing to pay for it? Those influencers determine the packaging. Design a package with minimal amount of attributes to resolve your client's needs. Comply to the business plan that is supported by the model. If the packaging does not nicely fit within these three superior aspects, your company will be unsustainable. My first career out of college was in the wine industry. Yes, packaging is the glass, the closure, the labeling, and the SKU, but extrinsically it's much, much more. These features, the pricing, its distribution, or like delivery or the availability, the user experience, and the branding equally influence what comprises the package. There's an arrow on pricing because during a cool economy, many people start discounting, which isn't necessarily the answer because all of these other components may be a smarter adjustment. That's because each aspect implicates perception. Packaging isn't a standalone component. It's how it's perceived within the environment and how people feel viscerally when they interact with it. Now, understanding your pricing principles will help provide a framework and context for testing, especially if you believe that the market appetite has changed or a competitor has made a radical move. Now, let's go into the principles next. These are 6 pricing principles that my incubator works within. We get the mechanics behind each type, and we know examples of pricing that pairs with these business models. To review, subscription models commonly use the freemium approach. For example, Evernote, Salesforce.com, and even Carta implement this approach. Cost plus is when you calculate your fixed and adjusted cost to deliver a product and add a percentage to the top line profitability. The benefit is that you're at a fixed margin. The drawback is that if the fees increase, but the customer budget does not, it puts pressure on reducing your margin. OEMs often do cost plus, and if their COGS or cost of goods sold increases due to supplier problems, then they are forced to crush their profits. We saw this during the COVID outbreak. Look at the solar market as a good example for cost plus pricing. Taking the opposite approach, competitive pricing is totally arbitrary, and the pricing is dictated by the buyer, not the cost of goods sold. It too has the same vulnerabilities, but they're at an inverse of the cost plus. Common service companies, like from legal services to yoga studios, are often competitive pricing because the market knows what are the other options. More complex sales cycles, like enterprise sales, we see value-based pricing where the analysts of the package benefits is actually quantified and measured. Then a price point is derived from there. This is a more partnership sales approach versus transaction-based. And working with like SAS or McKinsey as strategic consultants typically have this sort of pricing approach. Price skimming is often used in emerging markets or new category creations. It's where a price is selected and then over time it decreases as competitive threats emerge or efficiency in product cost. Oh, Siri, that is hilarious. Go ahead. Sorry, guys.
Always listening.
I turned her off and she just, I don't know, she's obsessed with me, stalker. So apologies. Okay, so let's go back to penetration. This is my personal favorite. It's getting razor thin on margin to disrupt a stagnant space or to break into a new category and build that trust. Only trick is not to go too low when it affects the perception of your product, and that we mentioned on the previous slide. Apple TV's $5 a month subscription is their way to break into the cable industry, where the average subscriber's ASP for the base package is $40 a month. Now that you see all these, you pick one, and then let's get into the validating package along with your pricing strategy. Next, you'll need to test the packaging in its entirety, and you start by doing an internal validation. When you look at the packaging, you want to look at how is it fitting as a feature, distribution, and profitability when it comes to your overall vision of the company, how your company is structured, and also what are your financial plans that are backing it. When it comes to the resources, start with looking inside as to the leadership and the talent that you have. Also, things such as your company location or distribution points, the current assets that you own and possess, as well as the cash on hand, especially nowadays. For the external validation, you need to test the packaging in its entirety. The first option is to test it from doing a competitive research. By comparing it with the competition based upon key components and differences, you can do a matrix of key components and map them out and see exactly how your product is different than others and if it's worth the push. By conducting surveys to measure the willingness of your customers to purchase, You can also indicate or identify different indicators in buying patterns that can help you with your marketing and sales approach. Also, pre-launching a beta or an early version of your product to a limited and controlled group helps you, in fact, test to see what is the cost and how long does it take to sell. Preferably, you're going to sell it at the desired market price, but sometimes that needs to be more forgiven. This also allows you to see how the sale and the onboarding process affects your organization and how it is also adopted within your prospective audience's company or them purchasing it themselves. And lastly, influencers. Pre-launch samples to your powerful influencers. Once you do the internal and the external evaluations and examples, I like to put stuff out on a matrix. And here are some of the key components that I use. First off, with the different packagings that we're testing, what is the model compatibility? And you can keep this as simple as high, medium, low for rating your system. Secondly, you need to do the financials to figure out what is the break-even point when it comes to the cost of creation, marketing, sales, and distribution. And how many units do you need to sell so that you're now profitable? And as you know, each of the packages are comprised of different features, are selling at different price points. So each of these packages will have different break-even points. As for the sales cycle, this is also very interesting to consider in your evaluation. Some packages are a little bit more complex and require more of a hands-on relationship or customization. Some of them do not. And so taking that into consideration with your packaging is also very helpful. The other ask is how much additional capital do you need to put behind it? And that also can help out just by a simple yes, no, maybe so with your current cash reserve of what's possible. Next is the fun one, and this is the competitive index. As you're doing your external validation points, you are going to get so much insight as to other market players and their approaches, etc. And you can also see what spots have they boxed out. The higher the index on a 0 to 1 score is oftentimes your barrier of entry that you need to overcome. Everything is overcomable, but it is important to understand the difficulty and severity prior to starting. Also, customer affinity, when you're doing your tests, etc., and working with your early adopters and advocates, you can find out how much they truly like just by utilization or by recommendations, etc. Use that and put that on the 0 to 1 scale to identify what packages have more sticking power. Then my favorite is moat. If you come out with this package, how hard would it be for a new entry to come in and bump it out? And this can be on a strong to weak scale basis. And the customer growth rate, for you to hit the break-even point, etc., how many customers do you need to attain in a year basis or in your period of business that you measure yourself against? And then this actually just starts feeding back into your business plan itself. And then lastly, what are your financial growth rate expectations for rolling out this new package when you attain this new customer base growth? All right, so that's it. Thank you so much for your time. Let me tell you a little bit about Henhouse Ventures. We are an incubator. We're based in Salt Lake City. We formalize the business models and go-to-market strategies based on our knowledge about technology and capitalism. We also provide an online education center that provides helpful insight to entrepreneurs who want to understand how to improve their business and better communicate what their business does. And it is my pleasure to be here. If you'd like more information, of course, like they said, contact me in LinkedIn or go to my website and I'm happy to follow up. Outside of that, this is also very unusual before we go into question. I have an ask for every single person on this call, which is that the Midday Connect is a really powerful tool. In fact, I was just speaking to Dale and Dan in our breakout room, and just, you know, how it just reminds us of things, sometimes of action items that we haven't done, and sometimes it gives us a new perspective on how to think strategically. It opens our eyes, it challenges our perceptions and patterns, and it ignites our passion to continuing our pursuit. I would like to ask everyone here to invite a woman, a minority, or someone who may be considered marginalized within your organization to join you. And this is because it will improve your company culture and it will strengthen your organization in so many ways. So thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Awesome, that was great. Thanks, Tara. There's Taylor.
Fantastic presentation, Tara. Thanks. So I threw a few of my questions into the chat, and it looks like Phil put some comments in there as well. But for the group, if you've got questions, feel free to unmute yourself. Now is just kind of an open forum to discuss and ask questions. So Tara, if you want to start with those in the chat, that's great. Otherwise, I'll give like 2 or 5 seconds for everybody to unmute themselves and ask you a question that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with the questions in the chat, and please make this as interactive as possible. I'm totally fine, you know, being interrupted. I love debates and discussions. So the first is, Taylor asked, how do you decide which of these makes sense for your new product? And when do you know how and when to change your pricing model? Well, first off, let's go back to the first aspect of the question, which is, how do you decide which makes sense for your new product? And I really think it goes back to the importance slide. This is a hierarchy of breaking down strategy to execution. And there is inherent aspect as to what your business model is that will in fact make or enable or disable aspects of the business plan. For example, you can't launch a SaaS-based subscription process if you're a retailer, because you just don't have that component unless it's something that you can provide on a monthly basis where people opt in. And that requires a whole different aspect of like back-end system, customer management. And those are the sorts of issues of meshing who is your business model with the actual packaging. Now, there are companies that took, for example, that SaaS model and totally killed it in consumer packaged goods. Dollar Shave Club is a wonderful example. You know, the Gillette family has made a killing on selling razors with absurd margins through the standard distribution channel of retail, right? And then here comes Dollar Shave Club saying $1 a month and you'll have a good shave. But we're going to usurp that whole distribution channel and just really focus on the business model itself. So when it comes to deciding which of these makes sense of your product, understanding the essence of your business model will certainly allow you to play within the packaging. How do you know, when do you know how and when to change your pricing model? That's a really, really good question. There are indicators that happen in the market. And in fact, this even happened with my company itself. We had all of these high-end services because that was exactly who and we were serving and their tolerance for our value. But what happened was when, and let me just explain for those who are unfamiliar with incubators, you know, we basically help prepare companies to scale and also prepare them for funding. funding is often the driver behind this, but when all of a sudden the investor market dried up with new venture funding, you know, where all the investors were just doing follow-on rounds, then the appetite or the target market that we were doing, which was like entrepreneurs attaining the first round of their investment, that too dried up because they knew that there wasn't, you know, there was a pause in the investment market. So because of that, that's when we identified that our market, in fact, dissipated when it comes to the value that they're looking for, which is funding. But they still are there. However, they're not looking for funding. They're looking for optimization and education. So they didn't disappear, but they're looking for something different. And it was up to us to pivot, well, to identify exactly what they need and to pivot accordingly so that we remain relevant. Taylor, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody have questions upon that concept or statement?
I have another question. My question, going back to a finance question.
Yeah.
I wanted to know, how much cash reserves should a company have? Is there some sort of standard? I think going through this experience has taught me, you know, you might want more than you really think, but do you have a suggestion on?
Yes, I do. Many of the investors were advising that when companies reassess their sales pipeline, meaning what are the likelihood of their prospective customers will still be available, and knock out anybody that was associated to services that were influenced by, for example, like the travel and entertainment industry just evaporating, etc. To take that number and to see if they can keep their company sustainable for, on average, 18 months. But investors picked 18 months basically by picking a number because they felt like it was longer than a year and shorter than 3, right? And so, you know, there's really so many sorts of debates on that. To answer your question, Dan, when you're looking at the financials, you should be able to break down your cost as to like, what are my fixed costs? And then how do I reduce them accordingly so that it's just enough? Mm-hmm. And then the other aspect is if I have adjustable costs that are associated with these different pricing principles, then how can I make sure that I understand the break-even point and have a substantiated business plan to basically bring it to market and make sure it succeeds? So that goes back to this evaluation timeline. You know, the matrix, right? So if we do choose package 1, we know we got to get to 100 units. If 100 units, you know, on average takes, I don't know, let's say it's, you know, 5.5 months, what we have here, make sure you have enough cash to at least break to 100 units for probably double the amount of time. And so there's where the math magic works in. Okay. But then this is the additional capital, which is basically shortening your runway or utilizing an amount of capital that you had on reserve. So it's a very hard decision to figure out what's the payoff in the plan.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. We got one from Bill Walker. And it says, I really like the sales cycle consideration for options. People don't always remember to consider this. Very true. Tara, what types of businesses do you think fall into Henhouse's sweet spot? Oh, thanks, Bill. You get to let me plug myself. We often work.
I think it's an important question, though, because I mean, you've got some specialties, and I'm genuinely curious to hear about the specialties.
Yeah. So a little bit more about my history, which I did not unveil. I moved here in 2014 and I moved my company here in 2016 because I am a serial entrepreneur from Silicon Valley. And I after the whole wine career, I went into basically enterprise software. And I was, in fact, the very first employee at Sugar CRM. I know there's a lot of people on this call that's familiar with the CRM space, which is awesome. So I was there and I ran marketing, and we went from $0 in revenue. I remember our very first sale all the way to 15 million ARR in the first 4 years. And that was when we launched the very first commercial open product back in the turn of the century. So I'm old as dirt and I'm in the tech space, but my enterprise foray extended from that when it comes to Henhouse Ventures, because we understand how to break into emerging markets as well as create them. And like I said, we're really, really strong with these 6 principles. There's a lot more out there, but I can talk to these because I have personal experience with them. And we've worked with well over 30 startup companies that are from AI, machine, like robots, electricity cleaning, like all this very interesting stuff. That just use these sorts of principles to create and break into existing and humongous markets. So that's what I do. Disrupt.
Thanks.
Tara, I have a question for you along those same lines. I met Dennis Ocampo on the breakout session, and it sounds like he works with you. And I'd love to know how someone engages you, like what was his story? How did you guys work together? What are the inputs and outputs?
Dennis and I, well, Dennis, can you jump in real quick?
Can you hear me?
Yes. He met me through UVU. I did a workshop for them to help them prepare for pitching. But Dennis, why don't you introduce yourself? Because this is a pretty cool person.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Dennis.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, we had like a slight hurricane, so all my internet went out. So I'm using my phone right now. But yeah, we pretty much met through that workshop where I told her about my company and what we're doing. And ever since then, I mean, I had a name change since then, so it's completely different from the beginning. But we've just pretty much been talking about the same things like she's been explaining in this session about just the certain things that is needed to get to, you know, obviously certain levels and to hit certain metrics and so forth. So I'm just kind of like just taking all this in and just like, you know, reminding myself of the certain things that it takes to get to, you know, those levels that we want to hit.
Dennis, tell them where you're located.
Yeah, I'm in New York. Sorry. Yeah, so I'm in New York. I've been born here for, you know, I've been here for what? Yeah, well over 20 years. And like I said, I've created Outbox EDU, which is immersive educational gaming platform. And so what we do right now, obviously with the whole pandemic, as you know, schooling, right, the education system is in a disarray and people are trying to figure out what their plans are as far as, are people going to send their kids to school to learn? Are they going to just learn from home? And as you know, a lot of people are wary about, you know, COVID. So a lot of people are going to stay home, and we're trying to pretty much reach out to those people, right? Those parents, those homeschoolers that need that education at home. And so we build systems and games for them so that they can pretty much learn. And we use voice interaction. So it's very engaging for the kids. We try to make it as fun as possible so it's not boring like a lot of, you know, these programs and systems that are out now.
So EdTech, huge space. We've had a few customers as well in EdTechs as well prior to us working with Dennis. And the thing is that we're really driven upon the principles that it's the market and the approach in the, basically the meshing of the business plan and business model, more so than us just like sticking to a vertical of like, we only do enterprise software, right? Because that's the whole thing about incubation is often you have to pivot. And sometimes it takes an economic downturn or a catastrophic event. And sometimes it's just like, hey, my business isn't optimized. How can I make more money?
Tara, this is Taylor again. I've got a question on that front. Is with that change in the market, how does that affect the pricing strategy of the products? Like in Dennis's case, has your product changed? Are you guiding Dennis to change the pricing model that he uses, and how would
Yes.
how does that affect the ed tech space right now?
Yes. Well, so EdTech, okay, so every single space has different sort of parameters. One of them are regulations, like financial services as well as education technology are very, very similar because they're highly controlled. There's an RFP and a review process on a state level before you can even go in and sell to districts, right? The thing is that, and that takes legislature, right? And if you're in the FinServ space, you know, the same thing happens with FINRA, the SEC, et cetera. By understanding those sorts of regulations, it certainly does allow you to have like controlling. Price skimming, there's a star on this page for a reason, is because it can actually be counter-competitive. Like this is why, in fact, like Google and Amazon right now are in Washington, D.C. put on trial, is because they're doing price gouging, which is the opposite of skimming. Well, it's actually in conjunction with skimming. And so, you know, you got to first start with that sort of regulation aspect. As for the market moves, what happens is that you have to have an indicator as to what's happening with the budget. For instance, we work with a company that sells to call centers. All call center budgets have frozen because, in fact, it's one of those aspects of the IT spend in general that's just getting chopped at the knees due to COVID. However, the only aspect of the IT budget that is opening up is security based. So now that call center agents, for example, are now working at home instead of at call centers themselves, like protected buildings where, you know, people wear badges. Now they're in a coffee shop and God knows what happens there. IT is now getting budget to quickly fix that new sort of security vulnerability. And so those are the sorts of, you know, what I would say when it comes to the extrinsical validation as to like, you know, survey, understand the change in the behavior and, you know, really quantify it as well as go into it on a qualitative basis and measure how bad or the severity of the pain is and what can you do at the most minimal level in your product packaging to resolve that pain. Like, don't build more than what you need to, just get it done and get it out there, because expediency is the king in every single industry. Hope that helps.
Awesome.
Hey, Tara, I had a question on your next slide in that matrix.
Yeah.
With the competitive index and the customer affinity, I may have zoned out, but how do you quantify that on the 0 to 1 scale? Is it a case-by-case basis, or is there kind of a standard way of doing that?
Okay, so you're going to have to create your own example. And oftentimes, like what I was referring to before, it's sector related. Like the education space is going to be a lot different than the IT space, right? But you know, first off, like the categories can be like robustness. The categories can be, you know, what are their business plans and their pricing and packaging? What are their sales or distribution channels? Like where, you know, all of that good stuff, as well as their reputation. And reputation is kind of easy to find. All you need to do is talk to an analyst to say like, you know, who's leading it and why are they leading this category? And even if it's just like 5 components, that's fine. But you'd be able to stack up where you're at accordingly and figure out, if I do this package, it's very similar to this competitive cat package, and this, you know, this or these packages are pretty well established, or you know what, they're loosey-goosey and they need, you know, we can probably knock them off. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, thank you. That answers my question. I
Yeah.
have one other question too for you. This one's a little more of a selfish question. Does Henhouse deal in the healthcare life sciences space at all, or anything in that realm?
Yeah, so it's so funny. The life sciences people are always skeptical of me, and I get it, because it's a whole new category. We have done IoT health related products. In fact, we helped Layla, if you've heard of them. And so the reason why we were very compatible with them is we get the IoT device across the board, in addition to their business model, because they have a manufacturing and a subscription sort of plan that's basically substantiated by breaking into what's now an evolving market, because data is now enabling more insight, like health insight. So we were compatible in that sort of regards.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you.
Welcome. You're welcome. All right, there's another question. That is fine for sizing an investment round, but you can understand your
It
working
was just a comment. It's not a question.
Oh, okay. Well, I like comments too. And can you give me the kickoff point that you said that this is?
Someone had asked a question about how do I know how much cash I need? And there's two ways of looking at it. It sounded like you addressed the question of how do I size an investment round? And I just had a comment in there. Well, what if you're not looking for an investment round? How do you know how much cash you need on hand? And it's just a comment about that and how you would potentially calculate it.
Yeah, well, I mean, bottom line is, what is it going to take to survive and break even, right? And what's the burn rate? You know, the comments that I had about what the investor's perspective was that was their directive to boards. And that's what I received back in 2008. And that's what my clients have heard, you know, this past March, just a quarter ago, right? Which is, if we were not to give you any more money, you stay afloat for the next 18 months. And so I agree with you, Garrett. You know, it could be like a 13-week forecast, but it has to have that, you know, you have to go straight to the books, straight to your balance sheet and figure it out that way. Devin just complimented you, Phil.
Yeah, I stuck my camera at the window because there was a male deer that walked right past my window. So
I love it.
I have a nice surprise. But yeah, I didn't mean to try and capitalize the time, but I couldn't help but share when the deer walks by.
I love it. I love
We
it.
all know what kind of student Phil was in school when there were windows in the classroom.
Yeah, exactly.
Wait, Taylor, did you say something? I was sorry. I was looking out the window.
No, I was muted. Yeah, exactly. We've got time for maybe one or two more questions. If anybody has them, just unmute yourself and jump in, or any other discussion topics.
Well, overall, what did you guys think? It's fine. You can be brutally honest. All right, good.
This is awesome. So basically, I mean, what we're looking for from the expert and the presentation at Midday Connect is some frameworks and some strategies that can be implemented in your businesses immediately. And so I know at least a few of the members I've had discussions with them about kind of pricing models and the topics that you touched on. So this is very helpful. We'll have the recording. Michaela, it goes onto Michaela's account. So in the next day or so, we should be able to post a link to that in the LinkedIn group. We'll get you a copy of it, Tara, as well, if you'd like it. But thanks, everyone. And please take to heart Tara's challenge in terms of inviting people and working with people in your current roles. I think that's really important. And Tara, thanks so much for your time and for your presentation.
You're welcome. You're welcome, you guys. Have a good Tuesday.
Thanks, Tara.
Thanks. You too.
See ya.
Thank you, Tara.
You.
Thank you. That was awesome.